So whether you make kimchi from scratch or you've got some sitting in your fridge from the grocery store, today's video is about putting it to good use because kimchi is incredible. It's packed with probiotics and it's packed with insane flavor, built-in flavor, ready for dishes. But what are those dishes? And that's a really good question, and a question that I don't want to answer by just searching the internet, because what I found is that the best recipes come from the home. So I'm going to be talking to a few of my Korean friends today to really figure out how kimchi was used in their kitchens growing up. What are some of those more traditional family recipes that they grew up on? Because you know what? We could all use a little more kimchi in our life. My first question is, who was doing most of the cooking in your household growing up?
So growing up, my mom was the main cook in the house. We tried to help out a little bit, my dad a little bit, but definitely my mom took the reins most of the time.
Was it breakfast, lunch, dinner? Was it always Korean food? What was kind of the general flow?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely mostly Korean food, but obviously my mom wanted to cook us what we like to eat. Good old American kid lunches with sandwiches and chips and fruit. Maybe the difference there was like my fruit was like sliced perfectly, put into Ziploc bags and like packed into my thermos lunchbox. And I was like, Mom, you don't have to peel the oranges for me. Like, I can do that at school, you know?
But that's like presentation, you know, you come with the fresh fruit ready to go. That's exciting.
And I feel like if you're a kid or if you're on the move, if you're working and like you're staring at this orange that you gotta peel now after you have limited time for lunch, you're just like, put it aside for later. But you could just save it for now, snack on it later. It was perfect.
So how big of a role did kimchi play in her cuisine, in her cooking?
I would say that kimchi is something where like there's the whole camaraderie of like making kimchi back in the day too. It was like, you know, the neighborhoods got together, each family had their own kimchi making day, so it was like a thing. It's like a harvest day. It's like a celebration, and you put your kimchi underground or whatever and you start to ferment it. It's like kimchi will always be there and it'll always be a staple. And then there's always those really good variations of kimchi, whether it's cucumber or radish or cubed, you know.
Which most people don't know about, you know, the variations of kimchi. At least in the US, it's like spicy red Napa cabbage kimchi is the classic.
The best are, I think, the cucumber-based ones. You have the classic cubed radish kimchis. You have summer kimchis where it's like the white one. So yeah, there's just a wide variety. And I think some restaurants do a really good job of like slowly putting that in there. Even just like any type of like muchim, any type of fermented vegetable that's in some sort of spicier fermented sauce is like considered a kimchi toss.
So for you, you know, how was your mom actually using it? I'm guessing there was times where she was just serving it on the side with rice, and then there were times when she was actually making it into a meal.
Besides from being a panchan, whenever she wanted to use the kimchi as the main ingredient, I think obviously one of the best go-tos and that everyone in the family will like is kimchi fried rice, especially when you have a batch of kimchi that might be a little more sour for everyone's taste. You know, you cut it up with a scissor and then you fry it up with the rice. It's the easiest meal. You could do it in like 10-15 minutes, which I'm sure you've done so many times. Always make an omelet for the top.
When you say omelet on top, what do you mean?
So you just make like a round omelet, fold it over, and then just put it right on top of your bowl. It's kimchi fried rice bowl with just like an omelet covering on top. And then I just like to drizzle the ketchup on there. And that's controversial, like our whole cheesesteak. Does a cheesesteak need ketchup?
Don't even try to bring that up.
Yeah, sounds good. That's like another heated topic. It's a fan favorite. Like, you can't go wrong. It's so easy to make that if it's like sitting around the next day in the fridge, like I'll just eat it cold, throw some more ketchup on it, eat it cold.
All right, and as far as like, were there any more substantial dishes that use kimchi that were, you know, pretty pivotal for you growing up?
So growing up, and something that I love right now is whenever my mom makes me scallion pancakes with kimchi or other type of Korean pancakes with kimchi. You know, Korean pancakes are really simple. They're just made out of flour, water, and egg, and you add the scallions, and that's what people are most familiar with. When you slice kimchi into it, it just adds another layer of flavor into it. That's just so much fun. It's a great appetizer before barbecue. They're so easy to make. They take like 5-10 minutes. So it's always like if you're coming home from the beach or you just did something outside and you want something real quick, Crispy little pancakes.
I guess like the best thing about kimchi is there's so much built-in flavor in kimchi that really, it's easy to build a dish around it.
Even bibimbap, right? It's so popular. It's like the OG rice bowl. It's just a bunch of different kimchis and different vegetables all put into a pot and mixed up. And it's like the greatest dish ever. Like, people love it. There's like a handful of like cultures and countries out there that really mastered like preserving food without refrigeration. And I think, that type of technology was late to arrive in Korea. The staple like underlying theme of Korean food is like fresh ingredients from the land. Like whether it's a mountainside and you have all these special mountainside vegetables that you create kimchis out of, or it's your Napa cabbage you're making kimchi out of. But it all like began with, how do we preserve food? We got to ferment it. We got to put it underground. We got to combine it with vegetables that'll make it last.
Which is so interesting because now you have a cuisine kind of coming back around where like they were late to the game with technology. Because of that, the cuisine thrived in these other ways that now people are catching on to. And all of a sudden, Korean cuisine is one of the most popular cuisines in the world now, which is like happened over the last few decades. Is that kind of crazy for you to see just how popular it's gotten?
It's really cool to be part of the culture and witness it grow, like from within, because obviously with like Korean diaspora and the immigrant experience, like my upbringing at home was probably much different than other people in my neighborhood. But those little differences, I feel like as a kid, obviously they're the biggest things in the world, but as you grow up, obviously you start to cherish those differences. And so like I miss Korean food and I want to know everything about Korean culture. And it's amazing that not only can people do it today with like K-pop and music and culture, but they can do it through food. And I think that's really the most important thing.
Who was doing the cooking in your household growing up?
So growing up, my mom worked a ton. And until the age of 8, my grandma lived with us. So she was doing most of the cooking that I remember from my early childhood days. And then when she moved out is when my mom stepped up and would cook us dinner all the time.
So as far as kimchi goes, what role did kimchi play in your childhood, in your mom's cooking, in your grandmother's cooking?
It was a family affair, right? My grandma would buy bushels and bushels and bushels of cabbage, and we would go down to the basement and then we would just make it together. And then at the end, they would have different glass jars and we would divide it up. Each glass jar is like 5 gallons and each family would get like 5 or 6. And there's like 5 or 6 different families. The basement was crazy.
As far as the main dishes that, your mom and your grandmother were using kimchi in, what were the staples in your house?
So traditionally, my mom would make one main dish. We'd always have sides like piping hot sticky rice. And then in the middle, we'd have like 4 or 5 different varieties of banchan. We'd always have the kimchi. We would have sauteed spinach. Most of the times we'd have roasted seaweed and different like roots that were also sauteed. I just love, this was like my college poor man's food. I'd love to make piping hot rice. Like personally growing up, like I didn't just eat white rice. My mom would always add in different grains. And so when I would go to college, she would, have a Ziploc bag, like the gallon Ziploc bag of the grains. And she'd like, make sure you mix this with the white rice. I would cook this rice, but it would be white rice mixed with different multi-grains and purple wild rice. And I would add a tablespoon of soy sauce, a teaspoon of sesame seed oil, mix it up, put that to the side. And then I would make a fried egg over easy. and then I would combine the rice and the eggs together, add some kimchi, and wrap the roasted sesame seaweed over it. And it was just my favorite thing to eat.
This is taking what you learned from your family and this is how you applied it to college.
Yeah, I mean, in between classes, when I have like 45 minutes to eat and to get to class, I'm like quickly, hustling, bustling in the kitchen. And, if a roommate or friend were in the kitchen, I'd be like, oh, do you want some? And everybody's like, what are you eating? So different and funky. And I'd always share the wealth.
What's another staple kimchi dish that you were consuming for dinner?
For dinners, a big staple in my household was kimchi jjigae. The translation is kimchi stew. So traditionally, Koreans don't like to waste food. Yeah. And so when kimchi gets too fermented or too sour, it's not as good. So we would make a stew out of it.
And when you say not as good, you mean like to eat fresh as a banchan, like on the side?
Sometimes it gets a little too sour. It just gets a little too funky and pungent. And so we would make this stew as a family. Like I could kill 2 bowls of rice with it. It's one of my favorite dishes. So with the kimchi jjigae, you would begin by making the anchovy broth. You would get a pot of water, add in dried kelp, dried anchovies, and the ends of the scallions, and you would let that boil, and you would put that to the side. And then in another pot, if you'd like, you can put your protein in. You can either put pork belly, chunks of beef in, or you could just keep it the way it is without any meat.
So it's like leftovers. It's just whatever's on hand.
Whatever's on hand. You would dice up the extremely fermented kimchi, and you would saute that for a little bit with sesame seed oil, and then you would add the anchovy broth in, and you would let it boil. And then you put gochugaru, which is the Korean chili flakes, and then you would let it boil, and then you would put tofu and scallions at the end. For the tofu, is it the super silky tofu? Because I've seen that made with like the really fall apart silky tofu. You would use that silky tofu for sundubu, but for this dish, you would use the firm or medium firm tofu. You don't want it to fall apart. So when you make one communal pot of this, and then everybody gets their own bowl, and so everybody gets a little bit of meat, lots of kimchi, broth, and everybody gets 1 or 2 slices of tofu. That's really like the ultimate dish right there for dinner, because 1, you're taking advantage of leftovers. 2, it has everything. You have vegetables, protein, fermented items, you have meat, you have fish, like you pretty much have everything in that pot. So is that the idea? That's like just a sustaining dish for most Korean households? The best part about this dish is just at the end, you feel warm and like comfort. And you're like, I had a really good meal. So I'm gonna enjoy this meal, but there's one thing I wanted to crack open, which is this right here. Makgeolli, I'm not really sure how you pronounce it, but it is a Korean rice wine that is sparkling, and it works really well with kimchi. I was in H Mart getting all these ingredients, so I figured, why not? It's like a milky rice wine. That is really nice. It's just like a rice wine, but it's creamier and it's sparkling, of course. So I can imagine that's why people want to pair it with kimchi, kind of cut through the spiciness a bit. Totally get what Mina was saying, how she can just kill like 3 bowls of that. It feels so right eating this stew. And it's crazy because it really hits every element. You have the fish broth, you have the meat, you have the tofu, and all of that flavor from the kimchi, which is why I love kimchi in general. It's just such a great base of flavor. You're gonna benefit from all the probiotics, which is why it feels good to eat a soup like this and also just eat kimchi raw as banchan. So that's it for today's video. Get yourself a jug of kimchi and start incorporating it into the food you make. And if you want more Korean food, well, click these videos right here, and I'll see you in the next vid.